All right, so now that we understand meiosis, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the sex chromosomes themselves, the X and Y sex chromosomes. So the first 44 chromosomes are called autosomes, in that they really do very little to determine gender. Um, they are pretty much identical, or maybe not identical, but they're the same both in both females and males. All right, so you can't tell by looking at the first 44 chromosomes, the autosomes, whether somebody is a male or a female. Um, so there. Most of your chromosomes are the same. If you think about it logically, albeit yes, there are the obvious differences between males and females, we are strikingly more similar than we are different. That 23rd pair, or if you will, chromosomes 45 and 46, are the sex chromosomes. So this pair here, having two X chromosomes, this determines that this person is actually a female. So if you're a female, you inherit an X chromosome for your mother and an X chromosome for your father. So, for instance, this person would be a female. And then, I can't tell anything else by looking at the chromosomes, but I know that this person is a female. If you're a male, you inherit an X chromosome, and from your father, you inherit his Y chromosome. Now, the fact that these chromosomes are all funny looking says nothing about males. It's just the picture. Whoever took the picture didn't put as much care and effort into the way the chromosomes are arranged. But paying more attention to down here, you see there's this big X chromosome and there's this little Y chromosome. And that really says it all. That indicates that this person is a male. All right, and that they don't have two X chromosomes like females. They have an X chromosome and then this smaller chromosome called Y. And it actually is important that it is a smaller chromosome, as we'll see. So the X chromosome is actually pretty large. It's one of the larger chromosomes, and it contains, give or take, 2,000 genes. All right, the Y is much smaller. It's the smallest, really, and it only contains about 80 genes. Okay, so if you think back when we talk about the homologous chromosomes concept, the X and the Y are not homologous. There is a couple genes that match, but most of the genes do not. In other words, most of the genes on the X chromosome are unmatched by another gene on the Y. All right, so many of these genes ultimately do help determine the traits in the sexes. All right, and we call them sex-linked traits. So really any trait that is found on the X or the Y chromosome is considered sex-linked. Anything found on chromosomes 1 through 44 is considered autosomal because, again, they're autosomes. So since women inherit two homologous X chromosomes, all right, in other words, every gene found on one X chromosome is going to have the same gene, maybe not the same allele on the other X chromosome. They inherit two of every gene as well, just like every other pair of chromosomes in our genome. Men, on the other hand, again, as I mentioned, they inherit one X with all of its chromosomes, with all its genes rather, but their Y doesn't really complement the X chromosome. So what happens is they only inherit one of every gene on the Y chromosome. In other words, there's not a second copy of most of the genes on the X chromosome. So what does this ultimately mean? One of the nasty side effects is that there are some disorders that are more common in males than in females. All right, so if the disorder is due to a recessive allele, all right, females usually have a homologous dominant allele to hide its phenotype, especially if it's rare. All right, so again, the only way you could have a recessive phenotype is if you are homozygous recessive. So a female, if she carries one recessive allele, and especially if it's a rare allele, chances are she carries the dominant allele on the other X chromosome. So let's say hypothetically there is a recessive allele for some kind of trait, and that recessive allele ultimately leads to kind of a negative phenotype. Chances are there's going to be a dominant allele over here that's going to totally mask and hide that recessive allele. Males, on the other hand, if they happen to inherit the recessive allele, they don't have a second X chromosome with a second chance and the possibility of a second dominant allele to hide the effects. And because there's no dominant allele, that recessive allele is going to show itself. It's not going to be hidden by a dominant allele. So there's two examples. One of them is mild and definitely livable, and the other one is much more severe. And the mild one, if you will, is color blindness. So color blindness is due to a recessive allele on the X chromosome. Now there are colorblind women, but it is far more common in males because for that exact same reason. It's due to a recessive allele. It's a little on the rare side. And women, chances are, probably inherited a dominant allele from their other parent to hide that recessive allele. So they can be a carrier but they will not have color blindness. And to clarify, what color blindness is you're not blind to color. You just confuse certain colors. So, for instance, in this picture, if you're colorblind, you wouldn't see that 18. That 18, the orange tiles there would appear green. Green on green would make it difficult. And then these are just variations. There's different types of color blindness. Like some people would not be able to see the 5. Some people can see it, but not see the 8, something like that. Now, a much more extreme example is hemophilia. And hemophilia is actually the inability for your blood to clot. And again, that is also due to a recessive allele on the X chromosome. And women can have it, but it's far more common in males. And it's very detrimental to somebody's life, because any even mild injury that they have, where any one of us, any kind of scrape would heal itself in due time, it doesn't for them. All right, so they would probably have to go to the hospital even for a minor cut to be treated, and likewise, hopefully, have it heal. Excuse me. So in each of these cases, not to put the blame, but ultimately, if it's a boy, it's the mother who is the carrier of the disorder and gave the boy her X chromosome with the recessive copy of that gene. And then the father, I guess you could say, is, also, not say to blame, but obviously contributed, because the father did not contribute a second X chromosome, which obviously led to them being a boy, but because it didn't have a second copy of that gene, ultimately led to them having that particular disorder, color blindness, hemophilia just being 2 examples.